All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Good morning. A special welcome to those of you who might be with us for the first time, whether it's your first time with us in the room or joining us online. If it is your first time in the room, I would love to have, by the way, my name's Jason, all right? I'm one of the pastors here. I just thought I might want to do that as well. I would love to have the opportunity to meet you. I'll be hanging out right here, right after the service. Before we get into the message, I want to tell you about what's going to happen next week. I mentioned it last Sunday, but this coming Sunday is really what we're calling is Celebration Sunday. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look back at 2020, and we're going to reflect and remember and celebrate all of the amazing things that God has accomplished this last year. And that might sound a little strange to you, but this is what he's been doing. And so you're going to hear from some more of our ministry partners, and really want to encourage you strongly either to join us in person or with us online. And Scott kind of alluded to it earlier, but I also want to say that with the increase in the number of COVID cases, just want to remind you that we are doing our due diligence. Our seating capacity is still at about 50%. So if you've never flown first class and had first class legroom, you're welcome. That's what it's like for you now, okay? We continue to do our due diligence. We sanitize in between the services. We, this year for Christmas Eve, by the way, we're having a Christmas Eve service at 7 p.m., 3 services on Christmas Eve. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an outdoor seating option right out here in the lobby for those that may be a little bit more comfortable. From the very beginning, guys, this is the way I've described it. It's kind of like we're all traveling down this COVID highway together. And you have a speed that you're comfortable with. And so as you're cruising your speed down the highway, all of a sudden you encounter somebody that's moving at half of your speed. So you pull up next to them and you kind of think to yourself, you would never verbalize it because you're way too polite for that. But you think to yourself, they should really be moving a little more quickly. And then suddenly someone flies by you at twice your speed. And you look over at them and you say, they should really slow down a little bit. Whatever your speed, that's okay. And I would just ask you, as you have continued to do and you've done so well, just show the appropriate sensitivities to each other. So again, this is why during our Christmas Eve services, we will have some outdoor seating. It might be a little chilly. You might want to bring a blanket, but it might be kind of fun as well. So that's that. So this morning, our Advent theme is rest. And I'm totally convinced, especially this time of year, this is something we all need a little more of, but it's not the kind of rest that you might be thinking about. We're not talking about physical rest, like after maybe you exercise or you're engaged in hard labor. It's not a physical rest. It's something completely different. In fact, it's the kind of rest that is far more elusive. It's very hard to get. Augustine was this massive theologian, monumental influence on the church. He lived in the 4th century A.D., and he famously said that you were created to be in a relationship with God. And the reason why your heart is unsettled, why it finds no rest, is because you haven't yet realized that you were created to be in a relationship with God. And so your heart is restless until it finds its rest in God. And this is a man who knew what he was speaking of. In his autobiography, he talks about pursuing worldly passions exceedingly, and it left him completely empty. In fact, he writes and he says, "How many times did my soul cry out, 'Why must I suffer? Why must I suffer?'" He goes on to say that later in life, he heard some little children singing a song, and the words to the song went like this: pick it up and read the book. He doesn't even know what the context of the song was, but he remembers these words. And so he felt like it was God speaking to him. So he picked up a Bible and he opened it. And this is immediately where his eyes fell. These verses in Romans chapter 13 that said, "Let us walk properly as in the daytime." Not like walking like you're in the dark where you don't know what's ahead of you or you're stumbling around. Let us walk properly as in the daytime. Not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. This was the very lifestyle that he had adopted, the one that thought would bring him rest, that would satisfy him, but instead put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. He writes that after reading these verses, it was like this flood of light enters into his soul, and he was immediately transformed He becomes a Christian, and he gets baptized. A decade after his baptism, he pens what many in the literature world, both believers and seculars, believe that it is one of the great literature pieces in all of history. It's the first psychological autobiography, and it's titled The Confessions. And as you read it, you can just see this man's heart turn toward God, and it's as if his soul is at peace. He found what he was so intently looking for. Jesus knows you. Let me say that again. Jesus knows you, and he knows you better than you know yourself. We so often are blind to our own blindness. It's amazing the deceptive thoughts that we have in our own heads. None of us sees ourselves rightly. And if you have one or two good friends, we've said before, an enemy will stab you in the back, but a good friend will stab you right in the front. They will expose you for who you really are. Jesus knows who you really are. Jesus knows the deepest longings of your soul. And that's why in Matthew chapter 11, he speaks to this need that you have to find rest. Not physical rest. It's way deeper than that. This is the kind of rest that you've been wanting your entire life, but you just haven't been able to find. And he puts it like this: come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. You ever say to yourself, man, my heart just feels really heavy? What do you do with that? And Jesus says, I'm the one that will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. What does that mean? We'll explore that in a second. Learn from me. Now, there aren't a lot of places in the Bible where Jesus takes the time to describe himself, but this is one of them. He says, because here's what you need to know about me. I'm gentle, and I'm lowly in heart, which is another way of saying humble. And then you take my yoke upon you, learn from me, this is who I am, then you're going to find rest, look at this, for your souls. Because you see, my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. First thing I want us to notice is that this invitation is for every single person in the world. He doesn't say, to all those who are completely burned out, you've just been burning the candle at both ends, come to me. No. He doesn't say, come to me, those who lack sleep. He doesn't single any one group out. He says everyone. It's an interesting thing that happens in life, and let me just say that this is a very different sermon that I'm giving to you because I'm 51 and not 21. All of the 50-plus people are like nodding their heads right now. Mm-hmm. Very different sermon. Because what happens is when you're young, you have this intense youthful optimism. It's true. It's like the world is your oyster. You begin life and you just feel like there are so many endless possibilities, and you set some goals and you start achieving those goals and you start getting some stuff and you start thinking, okay, yeah, I'm starting to maybe be the person that I've always wanted to be. I'm gaining some things. Jesus put it paradoxically, when you don't have stuff, you get nervous, like material objects, like material things. And it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get me some stuff. And then you get it, and then you become more nervous because now you don't want to lose it. So you start achieving some things, you start setting some goals, you attain some goals, and maybe you're ascending on the career ladder. Let me just tell you, midlife crisis is a real thing. You know why? Because there's something that happens with age that causes you to pause and ask yourself the question, is this really what I should be living for? You know why that question is asked? Because there's something inside you that's still a little, right? It's just like, I don't know. It's just a little unsettling. You don't have to be old to do this. If you some of the people that are at the very pinnacle of what they do, the best performers in the world will tell you. There was an interview in 2005 between Tom Brady and Steve Croft. And at this time, Tom Brady was 27 years old. He had won 3 Super Bowls. He was at the pinnacle of his career. He was drafted in the 6th round and arguably one of, if not the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. Here's an excerpt from the transcript. Brady says, there's times where I'm not the person that I want to be. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings? And yet I still think there's got to be something greater out there for me. Excuse me? Dude, you're wearing 3 Super Bowl rings. Yeah, there's got to be something greater out there. Maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. Yeah, I think a lot of people would say that. He says, I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. This can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I've done it. I'm 27. And what else is there for me? Croft asks, well, what's the answer? Brady says, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. This is what psychologists refer to as the happiness lie. It's this idea that you think to yourself, I'll be happy when I get this thing in my life. I'll be happy when this circumstance occurs. And then what happens is you get it. And then you realize it's not all that it was cracked up to be. But because you've attached your happiness to it, you're less happy than you've ever been before. I was reading just a couple weeks ago about a professional athlete. He said that it was the loneliest moment of my life, when I was standing on the platform wearing a gold medal, hearing the national anthem, and I thought to myself, my whole life has been wrapped up in achieving this goal, and now this is the moment, this is the time, and I don't know who I am. Additionally, life just has a way of giving you setbacks and heartaches. And it's like there are moments, even when you're enjoying things in life, there's always this concern in the back of your mind. There's always something present in your life. This is why sometimes when you experience joy, it can be tempered quickly, because there's this thought that comes in. There's something in the background. There's disruption in maybe with your finances or with your career. It definitely has to do with relationships in your life. This is the biggest one. It could be grief or pain over a parent, a spouse, a child, a grandchild. So even when there are these tremendous feelings of joy in your life as you age, there are these compounding circumstances that are they're always in the background. They're always there. And it's like even, you might even say to yourself, I just don't laugh like I used to. I just don't experience the joy that I used to. And this is why sometimes as people age, they actually get meaner, because they have these ongoing backdrops that they just have a hard time dealing with, realizing that life is constantly taking things away from you. So what do most people do with these things? Pain avoidance is super powerful. Don't think about it. The problem with ignoring the problem is that the problem is never static. The problem always grows. And emotions can be very hard to control. And if left unresolved, they will definitely overpower you. Meanwhile, Jesus says, I'm the one that can give you rest. I will take your burdens. Now, I want you to see that Jesus acknowledges the fact that you have burdens in life. And Jesus himself was a man who was described as having constant burdens. Do you know that? Isaiah 53 says this. He was how would you like to have this written on your tombstone? He was despised and rejected by men. He was a man of sorrows. Isn't that interesting? He was acquainted with grief, and is one from whom men hide their faces. There's Jesus coming. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. This is really good, because you know what this means for you and me? Jesus can relate to you. Author of Hebrews puts it like this. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. So then let us hold fast our confession. Our confession is what we believe about Jesus. Now consider this. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So when you have these burdens in your life, you turn to Jesus. Jesus is right there going, I feel you. I get it. I understand. Here, this is our leader. He was homeless, poor, and a virgin. So when Jesus was baptized, Satan took notice. And after 40 days, Jesus was fasting. He's in the wilderness. Jesus takes him. Satan tempts Jesus, and he says, I know you're hungry. You know, you could do something about that, and I can help you. See these stones? Turn them into bread. Feed yourself. See, what the temptation was there is to act apart from the will of God. And Jesus says, good lesson, by the way. When faced with temptation, what does Jesus do? He turns to the scriptures and he says, man will not live on bread alone. That's temptation of the flesh. Then at one point, Satan takes Jesus to a high spot and he says, look around. You see these kingdoms? They're under my influence. You don't think earthly kingdoms are under satanic influence? That's proof. He says, they're all under my influence, but you can have them. You just bow down to me, and I'll give them to you. And so what does Jesus do? He quotes the scriptures again, and he says, now here's where you're wrong. That's the temptation to pride, ego, to have it. There are all of these moments in the life of Jesus that you look to and you go, hey, Jesus understands what it's like. Jesus was betrayed by a close friend. No deeper wound than to have a best friend betray you. Jesus knows what it feels like to carry burdens. And then he actually spoke to these burdens in a very direct way. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is with the Pharisees. And these poor guys, because of their own pride, they just couldn't come to admit that Jesus was who he said he was. And so in Matthew 23, Jesus just absolutely torches them. Chapter 23, verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. So here in the crowd, it's a varied crowd, and here are the religious leaders, and Jesus calls them out in front of everybody. He says, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So practice and observe everything they tell you. So when the Pharisees and scribes, when the religious leaders read the words of Moses, do what they say, because Moses had it right. So as long as they're sitting in the seat of Moses and they're reading the words of Moses, do what they say. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Instead, they tie up heavy, look at the word, burdensome loads and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to just lift a finger to move them. So in other words, what Jesus is saying is that some of you are burdened by your religion. What? Yeah. Some of you are burdened by your religion in the sense that you feel like you have to earn your way to God. See, that's what the Pharisees did. They said, you do all of these things, and then maybe God will smile, and maybe he will let you into heaven. But you need to do all the do's, don't all the don'ts, and then the gates of heaven will be thrown open for you, and nowhere are you going to find that in the Bible. But the Pharisees loved that because they could control the entrance to those gates by telling you what to do, and therefore retain their power. And Jesus says, you make religion burdensome for people. It's quite remarkable, all the things that can burden us in this life. It seems like everybody has some expectation on us. This is why, sometimes we have these voices in our heads that go like this. You really need to try harder. You realize that you're not good enough. You need to make changes. And I think in some ways, I was thinking about it this week, I read an article about how Maricopa County continues to be one of the fastest growing counties in America, especially in light of what's happening in different cities across the nation. People are wanting to get out. People realize, I don't have to shovel sunshine. This place is pretty awesome. How many of you are natives? Represent. I would say maybe less than 10% of the people in the room raise their hands. A lot of people from some other place. I'm a native. I used to ride my dirt bike right here. I used to dove hunt with a lawn chair with my buddy Mickey, who I think is in the room, right on the other side of the canal where the TPC is. It used to be Tom Chauncey's Arabian Farms. Remember? This is my city. You all came here. This is my city. What happens is people move here because they want some change. They want something different. There's a feeling like maybe things will be better in this place. And yet, people arrive and they're like, I don't know if maybe the environment wasn't the thing. Maybe it was something deeper. What's so fascinating about these words from Jesus to me is that, he's saying them at a time when, as our Jewish friends today, they have this thing called the Sabbath. And what's the Sabbath? The Sabbath is a day of rest. And so what Jesus could have very easily, and perhaps the expectation was, hey, all you who are weary and heavy laden, hey, don't forget to keep the Sabbath. Make sure you're refraining from all your work. But he doesn't say that. Instead, he says, no, come to me. What he's saying is, I'm actually better than the Sabbath. I can provide something for you that the Sabbath can't. You say, better than the Sabbath? Yeah. If you read the book of Hebrews is all about the superiority of Jesus Christ. That's why at the very beginning, chapter 1, Jesus is superior to the angels. A lot of people in our culture, they want to go the benign route and just be like, oh, I'm into angels. I worship angels. Fine. The author of Hebrews says, Jesus is superior to the angels. He goes on and he talks about this royal priesthood. He talks about this great priest, Melchizedek, and he says, you know what? Jesus is better than that. Jesus is better than the Old Testament sacrificial system. Jesus is better. And that's what Jesus is saying about himself. He's saying, all you who are weary and heavy laden, hey, the Sabbath is good. That'll give you your physical rest. Remember, but there's something that's not quite there, and that is me. I can give you more. I can give you rest for your souls. The Sabbath isn't giving you what you ultimately need. And the kind of rest Jesus provides is exactly what we want. And then he says this, he makes this really unusual word picture. He says, take my yoke upon you. What is a yoke? Let me show you a picture of what a yoke is. A yoke, right, you probably already know, is this wooden thing that goes around the necks of at least two working animals. And oftentimes, a more seasoned working animal, would be yoked to a less seasoned working animal, and the younger animal would learn from the older animal by being yoked to it. And so if you pick this apart, what Jesus is saying is super profound, because what he's saying is this. You're yoked to something right now. No, you are. You're actually yoked to something right now. And you always will be. It's just a question of what are you yoking yourself to? Ooh, really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because here's what Jesus could have said. He could have said, throw off every yoke you have and be free. Be free. Be yokeless. Don't attach yourself to anything. But he doesn't. Instead, he says, you're yoked to something right now. You may not even realize it, but something is leading you. And it's not giving you the rest that you really want. So you have to exchange one yoke for another. I know this really is super offensive to modern sensibilities because we love to be free. We love to be free from authority. But really what he's saying is, if you let me lead you completely, then you're going to find rest for your soul. Now, here's the harsh reality that we have to admit. Some of us, we are being led, that is, we are yoked to things that are not good for us. Many people today are wearing the yoke of social media. Think about it. They're constantly being led by, being driven by, their emotions are controlled by what other people think of them as projected through social media. Some people are yoked to their jobs. How do you know? Well, let me ask you, what's really important to you in life? Is your job keeping you from that? Then you're yoked to your job. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's their kids. It could be their grandkids. Here's the challenge with that. If you are yoked to a relationship, then typically what happens is one of two things. Number one, in an effort to keep that person close to you, you will be domineering and intrusive. And then your kids or grandkids ultimately will want to push you away because they don't like that. Or number two, because you want to stay yoked to them, you will give them everything they want. And then what they learn is that they can use you for what they can get out of you. It's a rotten yoke. You're yoked to something. What is it? Think about it for a moment. Jesus says, whatever it is, it's not giving you the rest that you want. So if you want real freedom, you have to give up your freedom. I love it. This is so fun. This is the part where Jesus says so many things paradoxically. You want to find your life? Lose it. Give it up. You're already burdened. You're already attached to something. What is it? What is it for you? What are you living for? So it's really pretty cool because this is how it works. When you attach yourself to Jesus, it's not as if your failures go away. You're going to have a lot of failures in life. But when you attach yourself to Jesus, what you realize is that when you fail, there's forgiveness. And that forgiveness never ends. And at the same time, when you attach yourself to Jesus, when you succeed and you start to think more highly of yourself, the yoke of Jesus keeps you grounded. That's why this concept of being yoked really is at the heart of what it means to be a believer. And so Jesus described it like this in Matthew chapter 18. He said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. What does that mean? It says we're to have a childlike faith, not a childish faith. Big difference between the two. Unless you become like one of these little kids, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. So I was thinking about what this means, and it's kids know that they're helpless. Kids know that there's a lot that they just can't do. Kids know when they need help. There's no hesitation in reaching out, literally. Remember when your kids were little and you took them to Disneyland? And probably within about 15 minutes of walking around, their little legs get tired. And what does your child do? Exactly. Doesn't even need to say a word. Your child just goes. And what do? Hey, grow up. That's embarrassing. Have you no shame? No, you reach down and you pick up that child. You don't have to say a word. Unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. I think we're getting closer to what Jesus means by that. With a child, there's no hesitation in letting you know that they're helpless. And right there in front of everybody's watching, everybody's looking, that little kid doesn't care what anyone thinks. Totally oblivious. That kid knows that in that moment. And what's the response? Imagine if adults did that to each other. Imagine I'm at Disneyland with Jill, and Jill looks over at me and she's like, I'm tired. It feels weird. It's that, so when Jesus says, look, here's the reality, it's such a beautiful, Jesus is so intelligent. It's such a beautiful picture. So kind in the way he says it. Hey, you're yoked to something. You always will be. It's just a matter of what. What are you attaching yourself to? Attach yourself to me, and you're going to be able to rest at night. You really will. If you believe and if you are secure in the love of God, in the same way, that's it, right? In the same way that little kid is just so secure in that parent's affection and love and response. If we were that secure with God, can you imagine how different your life would be tomorrow? You'd throw off every yoke immediately, whatever's hanging around your neck, and exchange it for the one that will give you rest because you are desperately secure in the love of God. So let's do this. Let's give the Holy Spirit a chance to do his work. I just think this text is too profound to let it slide. And I've been dealing with this all week, so now it's your turn. I'm going to have you bow your heads and close your eyes. Even if you're watching online, I invite you to do the same thing. Simple prayer. God, reveal it to me. What is that yoke? What is leading me? I just want you to, in your mind, I just want you to just remove it from your neck and take the yoke that Jesus has and put it around your neck. I just want you to take a deep breath, inhale and exhale. And it's that childlike faith that gains us entrance into heaven because it's total confidence, total security. There's no pride in it, just security in the love of God. Father, your Spirit does its work when we are open, we're receptive, we've heard the good words of Jesus. I pray that as we leave this place, you would continue to impress upon our hearts and our minds what it means to rest in your love. Lord, whatever those burdens are, we're going to lay them down at Jesus' feet, knowing that he understands. The babe that was born, placed in a manger, born in a stable, placed in a manger, would become the man of the cross, a man who knew suffering, so that he could be our sympathetic high priest. May we forever yoke ourselves to him and experience eternal life. We ask it in the name of the one that makes it all possible, and his name is Jesus Christ. And God's people said, amen.